Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
3 days after Tata Steel dropped the bombshell that it's preparing to sell all its UK assets, including the country's biggest steel plant at Port Talbot, the government still looks like it's running to catch up. Asleep at the wheel was how the local MP in South Wales described it. It's fair to say there is no plan to save steel in Britain. Today, after chairing an emergency meeting on the crisis, David Cameron insisted the government wasn't ruling anything out, but didn't believe that nationalisation was the answer. But the Liberal Democrat leader Tim Farron said that the Conservatives supported nationalising the banks, so they should consider the same thing for the steel industry. Here's Secunda Kamani.
Clouds of uncertainty hang over Port Talbot. The plant's still open, but it's still losing around £1 million a day, with no new buyer in sight.
The crisis hasn't gone well for the government either. Labour's accused them of being missing in action, and some here worry that they're being abandoned.
The Business Secretary Sajid Javid has been on a ministerial visit to Australia. David Cameron came back from holiday in Lanzarote to chair an emergency meeting. But what are his options? Nationalisation? This seems unlikely, particularly from a Conservative government. Cameron, however, says,
"We're not ruling anything out."
Despite sounding very much like he's ruling out nationalisation.
I don't believe nationalisation is the right answer. What we want to do is secure a long-term future for Port Talbot.
EU rules do not explicitly prohibit nationalisation. John McDonnell suggested it could be at least a temporary solution.
If there isn't a buyer coming forward very, very quickly, it will have to be nationalised to stabilise, and then we look at the investment strategy for the long-term future. In that way, buyers may emerge, or we might want to keep a public stake, but we've got to secure the industry in the short term to give us those options.
Supporters of the idea say it's no different to bailing out the banks, but even the local Labour MP says nationalisation isn't feasible in the long term.
I think if we're going to talk about nationalisation, we do need to be clear that the devil is in the detail. So we've got to work out what would it cost, for how long. I think an open-ended wholesale nationalisation without a clear exit strategy, without a clear plan for when you would be putting it back into the private sector, would not be the right way to go.
Sale. The ideal option and the most unlikely, given Tata's losses. But the government are still hopeful.
Actually, Tata had announced recently another part of their steel business in the UK that they were planning to close down, and the buyer has been found for that. Recently there was an announcement for part of their business in Scotland where a buyer has been found. So I think there are buyers out there. It might require some kind of government support.
At present, no realistic candidate has put themselves forward. It's also not clear how much the government can actually help. Government support. The government could structure a series of loans to prop up the Port Talbot plant, but potentially this could fall foul of EU competition law. Earlier this year, the EU Competition Commissioner announced an investigation into €2 billion worth of state support that the Italian government gave to the struggling steelmaker Ilva. And those who argue that leaving the EU would free the government's hand? Well, not quite. It's almost unthinkable that Britain wouldn't still be subject to European competition laws as part of a trade deal, just like Norway and Switzerland. Closure. The IPPR think tank has estimated that 15,000 jobs at Tata UK would go, and even more in the supply chain would also be at risk. In the shadow of the steelworks on a sunny afternoon on Aberavon Beach, residents are assessing the different options too.
I don't know if the government are going to do anything, if they're going to help even in the short term, but it's 40,000 jobs just in Port Talbot that's just going to go. Like, where are people going to find work? There's a lot of people to try and find work in a very short space of time if it just goes.
Mr Cameron doesn't seem to be interested in saving the steel industry, so very sad, very sad.
If they bail out the steelworks, you've got other industries saying, why can't they bail us out? You're going to get that question as well, aren't you? Now, I work for a small contracting company. You know, if we didn't run our business properly, no one would be thinking, oh, trying to bail us out, would we?
Whatever happens next, there's a good chance this part of Wales will be changing. At the moment, no one's quite sure how.
So Kunda Kamani, well, joining me now from Nottingham is the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Kenneth Clarke, and in the studio is Paul Mason, the economics journalist, formerly of Newsnight, and of course now the author of Post-Capitalism, A Guide to Our Future. Good evening to you both. First of all, Kenneth Clarke, you heard the man there in Wales saying there doesn't seem to be, this government doesn't seem to be interested in saving the plant. There isn't a plan, is there? And the problem is that it's not 15,000, it's not even the supply chain. It's all the local communities as well that will be devastated if there isn't a plan.
Well, everybody's going to do whatever they can for the community down there. It is devastating. And you do have to think above all of the what you can do in the interests of not only the thousands of people working there, which you quite rightly say, lots of people living around them. I know South Wales. I often drive past Port Talbot.
Drive past it, yeah.
And it would be a devastating blow if it goes.
What about
but
Tim
you do
Farron's point?
You do have to have a serious plan as to how exactly you're going to save whatever parts of the steel business do have a long-term future. You can't just go for a knee-jerk reaction of saying we will take it on whatever it costs, we will now have the government losing £1 million a day, and we will put more billions of pounds in, when a very good company like Tata can't see any future in doing that. So you do have to look at it more seriously.
Paul Mason, you know, Kenneth Clarke's right, isn't it? The government can't simply just pile in £1 million a day indefinitely.
The point about having secretaries of state is not to put yourself in a position where you need to take a knee-jerk reaction. He's been in power for nearly a year, and we've seen in the last 48 hours what one man armed with a crazy private ideology that only he seems to believe in, and boundless stores of incompetence can do. Because the man, Sajid Javid, has destroyed Tata as a potentially market-orientated company. No, it is certain to be nationalised.
It is certain to be nationalised. Well, I mean, David Cameron said quite clearly, you've just heard Kenneth Clarke saying
you just heard him clutching at straws. You just heard Javid saying, maybe Tata will sell it to somebody. Tell us who that is, Secretary of State, you are in charge of the industry.
Is it possible to sell it off in bits rather than look for a buyer for a global company?
I think that is logical, because you know, nobody wants, and see, Stephen Kinnock is right, nobody wants in their right mind to nationalise something like this, because it will take a long-term turnaround plan to ever get it back into the private sector. But the problem is, Tata Steel is a collection of plants that do different things. You could sell them off, or you could even hand them to the workforce as mutuals separately, but the most steel industries in the world operate at scale because they need to draw capital from other sources. And simply taking Stocksbridge or Scunthorpe or Port Talbot and making it into a separate business doesn't necessarily secure its long-term future.
Kenneth Clarke, from a strategic point of view, can you imagine a United Kingdom without a steel industry, a major steel industry?
I hope we have a United Kingdom that has a good, modern steel industry, which is probably very much in specialised, advanced products being produced at a rate which is competitive. I mean, it just makes me nostalgic to hear 1960s leftism back in fashion. I mean, I used to hear all this when I was a young man. It was a catastrophe, and we were closing down steel plants even when we had a nationalised, subsidised British steel. Some of these plants obviously have a future. We've sold some recently.
But why is there no buyer for these ones?
Because it's losing £1 million a day, and there's a worldwide collapse in commodity prices.
We don't know whether it's losing
there is a surplus capacity in the Far East, but also all over Europe. And what you can't do is just say we are going to put however much it takes into our steel industry in the hope that other people might close theirs first.
Is there something bigger at play here?
Look, first of all, let's come back to what Ken Clarke just said there. We don't know whether it's losing £1 million a day, a week, in what sector, in what subsector. We need to know. There is a report out there that McKinsey, Stephen Kinnock, the union community took a long time to draw up, take to Mumbai. The Tata said it's not good enough. Let's see it. Let's see whether that's a basis on which we could...
How do you respond to the accusation that this is 60s leftism again? And it was a disaster before, and it was all very well nationalised, but these industries have actually eventually gone anyway.
It's all very well dissing nationalisation until your banking system collapses, isn't it? When half the banking system of this country and Europe had to be nationalised. Look, modern leftism, radical leftism, of the kind you heard John MacDonald talking about, is not obsessed with nationalisation. It's about shaping the market, understanding we are a national market in a global space, and that what companies want is long-term predictability. And Javid cannot give Tata or anybody else long-term predictability because he does not believe in the industry.
Tell me on the question, and Tim Farron mentioned this as well, if the Conservatives supported nationalising the banks, which they did, what is so different about nationalising steel, even taking it for a short term?
The banks had to be nationalised because if you don't have a banking system, the rest of the economy collapses. But, for example, when Redcar closed, we closed very sadly with great consequences for the community there. But we didn't just leap in. If you are looking for a future for that part of British steel which has a future, you do have to have people who know something about the steel industry,
what about the long
who
game,
look at the
Kenneth
international
Clarke?
market
Yes, what
and
about the
decide
long
what
game? You
can
hang
have
on.
a future.
What about the long game? Because we know that China is rationalising, we know that China's steel production is going to go down. Take the long view, that maybe we would have to bail out for a period of time and maybe deal with EU rules, but to lose it now would be to lose it forever.
China sets out 5-year plans. And what China has done is said 1.5 million people are going to lose their jobs as they make closures of those plants which they don't think have any future. And they're looking for alternatives, a more domestic, consumer-based economy to actually build for their future. The real way of looking after communities is to actually support and help those that have a prospect of being able to be a success, provide a good living for a generation to come.
But these are
if you get a steel company that wants to buy parts of this plant, they will have done a proper study of it. They won't be based on ideology. They will have decided how they can get costs under control, what products have a future, and what market they're going to sell into.
Let me ask, we had Rolls-Royce, but there was money put into Rolls-Royce. The government has put money into different things, even at a loss for a while. Do you, even from the mood music coming out of David Cameron, refuse to rule out the possibility that he'll nationalise?
I think he's going to have to nationalise some or all of those plants because Tata's got to work into a very short timescale. Incidentally, if there's one party that looks after the interests of the Chinese steel worker, it is, of course, the Conservatives, who've wasted nothing in vetoing the tariffs that Europe wanted to put on the Chinese steel that was dumped. And it is that we know from Tata's own statement to the press that was, quote unquote, the last straw in convincing them that the British government had no belief in steel. So yes, we need a long-term plan. We need a government that actually believes in intervening to save strategic industries, and Javid does not believe in doing so.
Ken Clarke.
We've put tariffs on China where they're dumping. We've got agreed European tariffs, but we can't go in for the tariff war. There are hundreds of thousands of jobs in this country which could benefit if we build up our own exports to China. And we are building up our exports to China, a great market for the future. To start engaging in a tariff war with China and excluding their products and then thinking they won't retaliate and take anything to exclude us from China is going back to the 1930s. It's even older and nonsense stuff. And none of these proposals being put forward have anything to do with the real problem, which is, can someone who can run a steel business identify this business or parts of this business and identify an investment plan, put it back on its feet and make it last? There is no ideological or political solution.
Thank you
to
both
that.
very much.
No real government has any alternative.
Thank you.